Oh, I see the counter counting up. Our participants are joining this webinar, so very good. We'll give it a few minutes so everyone can enter this Zoom webinar before we start. Well, I see still some participants are arriving. Very good. Almost 4 o'clock, at least here in the Netherlands. Well, I think it's time to start. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this FSSC Insights webinar. My name is Samantha van der Wal, or in English, Samantha, and I'm FSSC's Communication Manager. Together with Elsebie Matthie and Cor Groenveld, so Elsebie is FSSC's technical director, and Cor is our market development director. We will dedicate this webinar to the transition from ISO 22000 to FSSC 22000. But before we start our presentation, there are a few practical things I'd like to share with you. As you can see, you're all muted, but that doesn't mean you cannot interact with us. When Cor and Elsebie are finished with their presentations, we will dedicate a time slot to answering questions. Should you have a question, please send it in via the Q&A functionality. You will find this Q&A functionality here in Zoom next to the chat functionality. Please put your questions into the Q&A functionality and not in the chat functionality. It helps us in selecting questions. You can ask us anything. You can ask us about the transition from ISO 22000 to FSSC 22000, or you can ask general questions about FSSC, and we'll make a selection of the questions most relevant to the broader audience. This webinar will be recorded, and tomorrow you will receive an email with the recording of this webinar, the slide deck of the presentations given, some additional information on the transition from ISO to FSSC, and some useful links to useful information on our website. Well, I guess that is enough from my side. Please allow me to give the word to Cor Groenveld, FSSC's Market Development Director, who will start the presentation on the transition from ISO 22000 to FSSC 22000. Cor, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Samantha, and a great introduction, and thanks for hosting and organizing this webinar. It's very good. Yes, I'm very happy that you're all here. Thank you so much. A warm welcome. I see that we have more than 330 participants. So yeah, I'd like to thank you so much to take the time and the effort to join this webinar. And together with Elsebie and Samantha in this webinar, we like to give you information about the transition from ISO 22000 to FSSC 22000. But as Samantha said, at the end of the Q&A session, you can also ask us any other questions, and we will try to do our best to answer all your questions today or come back on it. This is the plan for today. Short introduction on FSSC 22000 for people who perhaps are not so familiar with it, and some facts and figures on this moment. Then looking at ISO 22000, the adoption around the world. We have some figures on that. And we like to share what are the benefits if an organization chooses for FSSC 22000. What does it bring you on top of ISO 22000? And then you can make your choice, because it's your own choice, obviously. And then I think most important, the presentation by Elsevier. What is then the process for the transition? So how can you transit from ISO 22000 to FSSC? So these are the topics of today, and I hope it will be very interesting for you. Let's go to the next slide. I press the button. Yeah, it works. Technique. Well, this picture shows a lot of information, and I will not go through it in all details. You can find it also on our website, and this presentation will also be shared with you in that follow-up that Samantha talked about. But some interesting facts, I think. What is FSSC 22000? Well, we are a certification program for food safety management systems. And we are using ISO standards. And I think that is one of the characteristics of FSSC 22000. We do use independent international standards from ISO. And most important is the ISO 22000 and some other technical specifications that will be explained by Elsevier later. We're also GFSI recognized. And GFSI stands for the Global Food Safety Initiative. And many retailers and other food manufacturers, food organizations, they are requiring that. They use it themselves, but they also require from many of their suppliers to be recognized for GFSI, so certified with the GFSI recognition. And that's why that GFSI is so important. What is also, I think, interesting is that we are owned by an independent non-profit foundation. And that's quite unique, I think. We are truly independent. We don't have any shareholders or other organizations that are owning us. We are a foundation, and that makes us also free to develop ourselves, but also free to work together with the food supply chain and all the stakeholders to ensure that we have a good certification program in place. The governance of FSSC, we have, of course, our own organization, but we also have our board of stakeholders. And the board of stakeholders are representatives from the different stakeholders in the food industry, and they are responsible for the content. They take the decisions in the end, and they also are responsible for the quality. Together with our board of stakeholders, we have a governance model to ensure that we have a reliable certification. We're 12 years young, so that is a kid at the block, not truly, but we're still quite young if you compare us with other programs. But we have already 28,000 certificates, more than 28,000 certificates around the world. And we are truly global because we have that in 168 countries. And I also like to emphasize when I say that we have 28,000 certificates, that we are not talking about quantity. Quantity is not our main purpose and our main objective. Quality is most important. And what does it mean? That we find that the reliability and the integrity of the audits and the certification is utmost important. And we are not focusing on being the biggest or growing the fastest. No, we want to ensure that we and our partners, the certification bodies, that we deliver reliable certification around the world. Our partners, you see them on the left side. Very important because we have the certification bodies who deliver the certification. We have now around 127. And they all have a license with FSSC. So they're all recognized and approved by us, and they have to meet our requirements. That is very important. And we also have the training organizations that can support also in delivering training to all organizations around the world. And then we have the accreditation bodies who help us to manage and to govern the integrity of the certification process. So the accreditation bodies, they also approve the certification bodies. That's a requirement. All the certification bodies must have an accreditation, and the accreditation bodies support us in guarding that the reliability is on the highest level. And on the right side of this infographic, you see the different sectors that can use FSSC 22000. But you can see it's almost the whole supply chain from farm to fork. This morning we also had a session with a lot of participants, and then I said from farm to chopstick, and perhaps now we also have some people from Asia. But what is important is that almost all the sectors in the food supply chain can use FSSC 22000. One last comment on this overview is that we also have a program for small and medium enterprises. And that is what we find very important. We're not only there for the big organizations, we're also there for the smaller organizations. So the development program that we have allows organizations to go in in 2 or 3 steps to FSSC 22000. So when organizations cannot meet FSSC in one go, they can use that development program that allows them to do it in 2 or 3 steps. If you want to have more information on our development program, please contact us or contact one of the certification body partners, and you can also find a lot of information on our website. So that is about some facts and figures on FSSC. And the next slide is already there. And what you see here is that we are a global organization, and we have certificates all around the world. And from our head office, our global team supports all the countries where we have partners or users or other stakeholders. But in a number of countries and regions, we also have local representatives, boots on the ground, as I say, and they play a very important role in the communication and supporting of the partners and the certified organizations. But also, if you want to have information, if you're not certified yet, then you can go out to one of our representatives. We have representatives in Japan, we have in China, in North America, in Latin America, in India. And if you want to have information in these countries or regions, please reach out. You can find all the contact details of the representatives on our website. So let's go to the next slide. Press the button again. Yeah, it works. So let's start with a question. And I think this is a nice moment for the poll, Samantha. So the question is, if your organization has an ISO 22000 certificate. So let's see what the answer is. You can say yes or no. We're very interested in that. I see the numbers are going up. That goes very nicely.
Yes, score. The poll question should be on everyone's screen now. So you can select one answer, yes or no.
Yeah. I see we have now almost 300 reactions from the 400 participants. And I think it's a bit like this morning, Samantha, if I'm correct.
Yes, you're right. This morning we had 62% of the organizations being ISO 22000 certified. I now see that it's at 63% here. Yeah.
Well, that's good to know, and that shows also that there is a real interest from these from your organizations in this. So let's continue then with the presentation and support you with that. Thank you for filling in this poll. So if I go now to the next slide, what is the current situation of ISO 22000 around the world? Well, we looked at the survey of ISO. ISO does a survey every year. And in that survey, they identify the number of, this slide is not yet, it goes one slide too far. Sorry for that. Yeah, so here you see the results of the survey in 2019. There's already a new survey in 2020, and the figures are not changed a lot. But you can see that there are more than 33,000 ISO 22000 certificates in the world. And most of them, as you can see in this figures are in Asia, in Western Europe, and in Eastern Europe. But also in a number of Latin American countries, we also see quite a lot of ISO 22000 certificates. Most of the certificates are in what ISO called category C. Well, that's the way how ISO defines the different sectors. But category C is manufacturing of food ingredients and food products. So that is the category C. But we also realized that many of these ISO 22000 certified organizations already have an FSSC 22000 certificate. And in that case, they have both certificates. And that's not mandatory, but some organizations want to have that. It can be their own reasons. It can also be because of their clients or because of the local food authorities. But some organizations have both certificates. And it's not necessary, because if you have FSSC 22000, you already meet fully ISO 22000, because we require that you have to meet all the requirements from ISO 22000. But it's a free choice if an organization wants to have both certificates. We estimate 60% of the ISO 22000 certificates also to have an FSSC certificate, but that still means that there are almost 13,500 standalone ISO 22000 certificates. The next slide even gives you a little bit more detail. So these are not all the countries, but these are the top 30 countries with ISO 22000 certificates. As I said, you find a lot of these certificates in Asia, in China, in India, in Japan, Taiwan, as you can see. But also you see in Western Europe, Greece, Italy, Romania, and also in Turkey, Spain, you see quite a lot of ISO 22000 certificates. And this webinar is, of course, especially for these organizations that want to know what will be the benefits if I move from ISO 22000 to FSSC. What we also did is for those top 30 countries with ISO 22000 certificates, we also have here the figures, how many FSSC 22000 certificates are in these countries. And sometimes you see that there are many more ISO 22000 certificates still, and sometimes you see that there are more FSSC 22000 certificates, like in Japan as an example. And so you see that there is some differences in the world, and that depends also on the need and the request from food organizations. Just to give you some insight on the numbers. So what are then the benefits for organizations to move to FSSC 22000? Well, I like to start with saying, if you have ISO 22000, if you are ISO 22000 certified, that's absolutely great, because you have a food safety management system in place, you meet all the ISO 22000 requirements, and that is a huge achievement. And ISO 22000 is recognized around the world as one of the best standards for a food safety management system. And it's also recognized by a lot of food authorities and also appreciated by a lot of food organizations. So what you see here is the shared benefits. So these benefits are as well for ISO 22000 and FSSC. To go through them very shortly, what is very important is that management system approach. It's really a management system standard that ensures that you have a management system in place. And this management system means that you're not only making today safe food or do safe services, but you also do it tomorrow and also the week after. So I think that is a big difference with the management system approach. Also, what is good with ISO 22000 is that it is the template of ISO 22000 is according to the harmonized structure. And that was a change from ISO, that all the management system standards in ISO had to have the same structure. They call it the harmonized structure. So if you look at other management system standards like ISO 9000 or ISO 14000, they have that same structure. That makes it also easier to have an integrated management system in place. What is also important, it is science-based. It is developed by independent international experts, and therefore we say it's trustworthy. So it's really science-based, and it's made by many stakeholders around the world, and the countries where you have the national standardization organizations, they all are member of ISO and they all support these ISO standards. So it's a very strong standard with a lot of acceptance in the world. It fully covers the HACCP principles of the Codex and also the general hygiene principles. You know them, obviously, and that is the basis. I always say that's the Bible for food safety. And of course, ISO 22000 covers that fully. And a very important element of ISO 22000 is the focus on continuous improvement. It is not only looking at ensuring that you are not making non-conformities, but also make sure that you find the root cases when things go wrong. We all want to have that perfect management system in place, that nothing goes wrong. Well, I can tell you it does not exist. Things can go wrong, you know that. But if things go wrong, you want to prevent it happens again and again. So you need to do a robust root cause analysis to find the root cause of your non-conformities, and then you have to find a solution. corrective actions. And that is, I think, a very strong element, the plan, do, check, act, and the root cause analysis. Risk-based approach, you need to do a risk analysis, not only on food safety, but also a risk analysis for your internal, external stakeholders and other external risks. And it covers the whole supply chain. And that's unique from ISO 20000. It is one standard covering the real full supply chain. And as I said, FSSC 22000 is close to that, but we have a few sectors that is not covered yet in FSSC 22000. Perhaps in the future, you never know. It's focused on the how. ISO 20000 is not a list with prescriptive requirements. You have to do this, you have to do that. No, it tells you, you have to identify your food safety hazard yourself, and you have to make sure that you have your control measures in place. And that is, I think, the freedom that you get in ISO 20000. Sometimes a challenge, but most organizations appreciate that freedom because every food organization is unique and every food organization have their own specific hazards and control measures they need. So I think this is the great message. ISO 20000 is very good, and these are the shared benefits. So when I go then to the next slide, what is then the additional benefits from FSSC 20000? Why should an organization move to FSSC 20000? Well, there are absolutely good reasons for that. First of all, what I said already, that GFSI recognition. What is so important if you supply to certain retailers or certain other clients? The GFSI recognition is for FSSC 20000 in place and not for ISO 22000, because we as FSSC 20000, we meet additional requirements that are set out by the GFSI. So FSSC 20000 has that recognition from the GFSI. It is a program of choice, a certification program of choice of many global food companies. And as I said, they often also ask that for their suppliers to have the GFSI recognized certification in place. And with FSSC 20000, you have that. We have a public register on our website. You find all the certified organizations, all the 28,000 plus, and you also find their scope of activities, so the activities they do, but also the status of the validity of the certificates. And in future, we are even planning to use that register in our database to provide more interesting data to the users of FSSC. Also things like benchmarking information. So we really want to expand the data that we can share with our users and partners in future. Applicable sector-specific technical specifications. That is really a difference because Elsie will explain later a little bit more in detail. But if you look at FSSC 20000, next to ISO 20000, you also need to meet the requirements of the technical specification of your sector that is including the prerequisite programs. And that is a mandatory requirement, what makes the system even stronger, because those technical specifications really cover the most important controls for prerequisite programs. We work together with a lot of major international associations. I think that is important, that we do our networking, collaboration with several organizations. And we are flexible. We have our additional requirements. If you have an ISO standard, normally they change in once in the 4, 5, 6 years. So they're not fully flexible. But with our additional requirements, we can put requirements in place depending on food safety issues that happen tomorrow or next year. So we are more flexible by having the possibility to add additional requirements on top of FSSC, on top of ISO 20000. So I think these are good reasons to choose for FSSC 20000. So we can give you more details if you want to, but also certification bodies or training organizations can give you much more information on it. And as I said, the supply chain, we cover almost the whole food supply chain. And you see that here, the different sectors. The largest sector, most certificates we have in food manufacturing in the middle of this screen. But also we have a lot in food packaging materials, animal feed. In farming is smaller. And we have new sectors like transport and storage, logistics, grows quite fast at the moment. And the newest ones are catering, retail, and wholesale. And we also see that there is uptake there. And that is very interesting. You find on our website some very interesting articles and case studies on examples of these organizations. And there's also one case study from Danone in China. They moved from ISO 22000 to FSSC 22000. So that is, I think, a great testimonial of an organization in China, Danone, that did the transition last year. So if you're interested, please look there. Here you find some organizations that use FSSC 22000, but here you see large organizations who are very important, international organizations. But in those 28,000 certificates, we have many, many smaller organizations too. We're not only there for the big organizations, let's be very clear on that, also for the smaller national organizations. And if you look at our public register, you see here a link to the public register. You can find all those great organizations, large and small, international and national, that use ISO 22000. And here, without going in detail, just to give you an idea of our collaboration with international associations and NGOs, what we also find very important. We do that in several countries, but also with some international organizations. And we think that's very important to have that collaboration. So I said already, it's not about the quantity, but about the quality and the reliability of the audits. Well, therefore, we have our integrity program, and we find that one of the most important elements of our program. This is to ensure that we and the partners deliver reliable certification and training on a very high level. And that integrity program is in place. We have a team, a dedicated team, that is doing all kinds of monitoring and checks and balances. And we have a very good relationship with our partners, because it's also in their interest that the reliability and the quality of the audits and certification is at the highest level. So together with them, we ensure to meet the highest expectations. And we found it very important. Sometimes we get some questions and some remarks that FSSC 20000 might be a little bit complex. Well, yeah, I hope that I already gave you a flavor that the complexity, especially when you have already ISO 20000, is not so bad. And Elsie will tell more about that transition process. We have our additional requirements, of course, but I also try to show you that they also have a high value. They ensure that flexibility, but also they make sure we have that integrity program and those requirements to ensure reliable certification. So we think that complexity brings much more than it asks from the users. And also sometimes we get a question on the costs. And yeah, an audit takes a little bit longer on FSSC 20000 because certification bodies also need to check that technical specification. But on the other side, I think I showed you that what you get into return is worthwhile. So we believe that the complexity and the cost, that if you compare that with return on investment and what you get, is absolutely acceptable. I need to close my presentation, Elsie. So I like to move to you to go to the real good stuff about how to do the transition from ISO to FSSC. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cor. And I'm really happy to see that we have a lot of participants again for this webinar today. As Cor said, I will be discussing the process of transition from ISO to FSSC 22000. And I would like to start with a short video clip that is also available on our media page. And you can also watch this back later if you want to. And this clip just gives you a little bit of an overview of ISO 22000 to FSSC. So Samantha, if you could please play the recording.
Today, more and more food companies and retailers require that their suppliers hold a Food Safety Management System certificate that is recognized by the Global Food Safety Initiative, the GFSI. Although ISO 22000 is the global standard for food safety management systems, it is not recognized by the Global Food Safety Initiative. Are you already ISO 22000 certified? Then why not push forward and achieve full management systems FSSC certification recognized by the GFSI? FSSC 22000 is fully based on ISO standards, and it's just a small step with much added value for you. You achieve FSSC 22000 by meeting the requirements of the technical specifications for sector prerequisite programs and a number of additional scheme requirements. The transition to FSSC 22000 won't cost you valuable time for lengthy audits. Your FSSC 22000 licensed certification body can combine the scheduled ISO 22000 audit with the FSSC 22000 transition audit. After this FSSC 22000 transition audit, your ISO 22000 certificate will be upgraded to a FSSC 22000 certificate. The audit is a combined audit. Your certification body can provide all information about a transition to FSSC 22000, ensuring consumer trust in the supply of safe food and drinks.
Thank you, Sam. I'm just waiting for the presentation to come back on. Right, okay, so before I go into the detail of the transition process, I think it's also important to understand the structure of FSSC 22000. So as you can see on the slide, the scheme consists of three main components. ISO 22000, and this is fully covered by the scheme, as Cor already mentioned. Then you have the sector-specific PRPs, and for those there are specific technical specifications and also in some cases a PAS or publicly available standard. And then we have the additional FSSC 22000 requirements. And these are specifically to ensure consistency and integrity, to provide governance, and also to add agility. It gives us the opportunity to address some emerging food safety issues. As Cor also mentioned before, so a good example of this was that with the COVID pandemic, we were able to react quite quickly and produce additional annexes and addendums to allow for other methodologies, for example, the use of ICT and full remote auditing. So as you can see in this blue box, the two additional components that you need to address when you transition from ISO 22000 to FSSC is the sector-specific PRPs and the additional FSSC requirements. So we will go into a little bit more detail on each of these in the next section. So when we start with the prerequisite programs, or PRPs for short, this is not new. So if you are already a ISO 22000 certified organization, you will know about PRPs, and it is already a requirement in ISO 22000. So there's two clauses listed on the slide. So if you look at 821, that already requires that the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain the PRPs. So this is a requirement, and it's already there. But then when you look at 823, it says that the organization should consider the applicable part of ISO TS 22002 series, which is the PRP technical specifications. Now, those of you who are familiar with ISO language will know that shall means it's a mandatory requirement and should is a recommendation. So even though you need to have PRPs established and implemented for ISO 22000, it is not mandatory to use the technical specifications. And this is one of the big differences between ISO 22000 and FSSC 22000. So for FSSC, this is a shall. So the PRPs or the technical specifications has to be implemented. It's also maybe worthwhile pointing out that some of these requirements will already be covered in your ISO management system. It just depends on the level that you have implemented. And this slide shows an overview of the different technical specifications that is available. So you will see they all start with ISO/TS, which is just short for technical specification. And then part 1, so it has a dash. So part 1 is for prerequisites for food manufacturing. And then, for example, you have part 5, which is prerequisites for transport and storage. There are in total 6 different ones across the different sectors. And in some cases, we also apply a PAS or a publicly available standard. And this is where the ISO technical specification is not available. So when you have retail or wholesale, you have to use the PAS 221. Then when we move on to the third component, if you recall the slide showing the different boxes, the FSSC additional requirements. And these are available in our scheme. So if you download the FSSC scheme document, in part 2, chapter 2.5, these additional requirements are explained. And these are the requirements that the organization is being audited to. So when you are an organization wanting to reach FSSC certification, already have it, it means that you need to comply with these additional requirements as well. Now, yes, you can see at the moment there are 15 different ones, and they vary quite a lot in terms of the topics. They mostly come from our GFSI benchmarking, and there are two different scenarios. The one is where the requirement might already be in ISO 22000 or in the technical specification, but maybe not to the specific level of detail required. Or in some cases, it is not covered in the ISO 22000. So a good example of that is, for example, food fraud mitigation. The other thing to also watch out for with the additional requirements is in some cases, there is no categories listed next to it. So the food fraud, once again, is a good example. And that means that it applies to all organizations, regardless of the category. And then in some others, like if you look at number 8, for the formulation of products, these specific requirements only apply to category D, which is our feed category. So somebody just pointed out that food fraud is in clause 4.1 of ISO 22000, but it is a very generic clause. So, and to that point, we have also produced some guidance documents, which you can also find for free on our website, that you can download under the scheme documents. So for example, we have guidance documents on food offense and food fraud, amongst other things. Now that you have a little bit more of an overview in terms of the different components in FSSC, let's have a look at the actual transition process. So the first thing you need to do is to make sure that you have all the relevant information. And if you are already certified to ISO 22000, that would mean that you already have the ISO 22000 standard. For the technical specifications, and this is the ISO TS, you need to define or determine which ISO technical specifications apply. And in some cases, it's also important to understand that maybe more than one technical specification apply. For example, if you are a beverage company that also produces PET bottles, then you will have 2 technical specifications that apply to your organization. The one would be part 1 on food manufacturing, and the other one would be part 4 on packaging. And as I said before, if you are in the retail and wholesale scope, then the PAS 221 will apply. The PAS is available as a free download from the website because it is a publicly available standard, And the ISO technical specifications you need to buy from the ISO website because these are official ISO documents. The additional FSSC requirements, as I mentioned previously, is available in the scheme documents, which you can download from our website. So now, when you have your relevant documents available, we do advise that you perform a gap analysis against the relevant requirements, specifically the ISO technical specifications and the FSSC additional requirements. And this gap analysis will help you in identifying and closing any gaps in your system. This will vary depending on the level of implementation of your current ISO 22000 food safety management system. When you are ready and you think that you are meeting the requirements, you can select a licensed FSSC certification body. And there's a list available on our website. So when you go to the FSSC website, there's a section for partners. And when you click on certification bodies, you will find the list of our licensed certification bodies, also including the subcategories that they are approved for, as well as the countries in which they operate. If you already have existing ISO 22000 certification, it's also good to verify on our website whether the CB who's delivering your ISO 22000 certification is also a licensed FSSC certification body, because only licensed FSSC certification bodies may deliver the FSSC audit. Once you have your certification body, then they can provide you with a proposal setting out the costing and the duration, and they can also provide you with more information on the actual transition process. So what do you need for this transition audit? The detail of this is described in our scheme in part 3, specifically chapter 5.8. And I'm not going to go into all of the detail of that, but yes, just a couple of bullets highlighting some of the key points. In the first instance, you need to have a valid ISO 22000 certificate, and also important with an equivalent scope to the scope that you are applying for FSSC. So for example, if you have an ISO 22000 certificate in farming, then you cannot, well, you can apply, but you cannot apply for a transition audit to FSSC if your scope is in manufacturing, for instance. It needs to be like for like scopes on the ISO 22000 certificate and what you are applying for FSSC. The transition audit will be a stage 2 audit, and once completed successfully, it is then the start of a new 3-year FSSC certification cycle. It does mean that you are not required to do a stage 1 audit. It is up to the discretion of the CB, but typically a transition audit only consists of a stage 2 audit. The duration of the stage 2 audit is 2/3 of the initial audit duration of your ISO 22000, and it's exactly the same table that is being used in ISO TS 22003. So you calculate the 2/3 of the initial audit duration based on the ISO calculation. The minimum is 1 day, it cannot go below that. If your calculation works out on a higher number, then you use the higher number, of course. And then in addition, you add the TFSSC or the additional time for FSSC. Now, sometimes we get the question, why do you need to add additional time? And if you think back on the slide with the 3 components, it is to address the additional time you need to audit the specifics related to the PRPs, but also those FSSC additional requirements that is set out in part 2. The time for FSSC is between half a day and 1 day, and this depends on the number of full-time employees and the number of HACCP studies. And it is the combination of the both. So if you look, for example, at the first one, if you have 240 FTE, but you have 3 HACCP studies, that automatically puts you in the 1 day category because you have 3 HACCP studies. So the lower combination is not being met. So in summary, if you want to or need to move from ISO 22000 to a GFSI recognized certification program, FSSC is the most efficient way of doing that, mostly because it already includes ISO 22000 as a normative document. It therefore is a relative small step for ISO 22000 certified organizations to meet the FSSC requirements. But it's also important to highlight that the effort will depend on the content and level of implementation of your ISO 22000 system. The gap analysis will help you to identify any missing elements, but it's also important to note that the gap analysis is just a recommendation that you do that. It is not a mandatory requirement for you to do a gap analysis. And then last but not least, the additional audit time compared to ISO 22000, we consider to be rather limited when you compare it to the benefits that FSSC brings to your business. And that's also something that Cor explained very nicely in his slide. So there's a lot of benefits to ISO 22000, but there is also a lot of additional benefits that FSSC brings. So thank you for your attention. And I think, Sam, we will now be moving to the Q&A session.
Yes, Elzevie, that's correct. Thank you for your presentation, and Cor, thank you as well for your session. I will stop sharing my screen now, and it is indeed time to answer some questions. Here we are again. Let me open the Q&A box, but I already peeked and I noticed someone asking if we could explain a bit more about our FSSC program for SMEs. And I think Cor would be the right person to do so. So Cor, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, great question. And I said it already, FSSC is not only there for the large organizations and the multinationals. We also want to take our responsibility as a non-profit foundation for the small, medium enterprises. And we have many of them, and they play a crucial role in the food supply chain. And therefore, we developed our development program. And that is a program that you can use if you're not able to meet the FSSC 22000 requirements in one go. So if you need more time or you want to do it in steps, then this is a perfect program. It has 2 stages. It has stages, what we call level 1 and level 2. It is based on the GFSI Global Markets Program, but what we did, it's fully aligned with the FSSC 22000 requirement. So the structure is the same as we have in ISO 22000 and in the technical specifications. So it's also easy for organizations that use it to grow to FSSC 22000. It's a flexible program. You can do it in 2 steps. You can do it in 3 steps. You can take your own time for it, and you get also a conformity statement if you meet level 1 or level 2. So you also get the recognition, and we also publish the organizations on our website. So it shows already that these organizations take food safety seriously, as is also said in, I think, one of our videos. So great question, and please contact us or your certification bodies, partners. And on our website, you find a specific page on the development program with much more details, and you can download for free, that's the last thing, the requirements and also the gap analysis tool. So you can download it for free and you can use it as a gap analysis to see if you meet the requirements on level 1 or level 2. So that's the development program, Sam.
Thank you, Cor. That's the development program in a nutshell, but as you say, on our website, there is a dedicated section to the development program with more information. Now I think we have a nice question for Elzevie. Can a food company keep an ISO 22000 certificate and an FSSC 22000 certificate at the same time on the same scope issued by the same certification body?
Yes, so thanks for the question. And I think Cor also touched on this a little bit in his presentation. So yes, it is possible. It's up to the organization to decide whether they really need to have 2 certificates, one for ISO 22 and one for FSSC. But it is completely possible to do that. So you can have 2 certificates with the same certification body. It is purely based on the organization whether they need to have 2. Although I have to say, ISO 22000 is fully covered in FSSC. It is also reflected like that on the certificate as a normative document, but sometimes clients just want to see another certificate as well. So yes, Sam, the short answer is yes, it's possible.
Well, thank you, Elzevie.
If I may add something to that, because I also looked in the chat and in the questions, and I saw also some comments on that people think they first need to go for ISO 22000 before they can go to FSSC 22000. But that's not needed. You can go directly to FSSC 22000. It's not needed to first have an ISO 22000 certificate and then go to FSSC. That's not necessary. It's your own choice. This is how you can do the transition when you have already ISO 22000, but many organizations, they go directly to FSSC 22000, and that's fully allowed.
Thank you, Cor, for adding that. Then another interesting question, I think. Someone asks, being very objective, why choose FSSC 22000 compared to SQF or B or C? Of course, we're not objective at all, but Cor,
yeah.
Why?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I fully understand that, and I really think that organizations have to look at the different certification programs before they make a choice. And we will never say that one is better than the other. I will never say that one of them or we are better than the others. That's not the fact. We are different, and we all have some differences. And I think the difference in FSSC 22000 is many of the things we already showed you in the additional benefits, and the benefits also in ISO 22000. And I would emphasize, and Elsie, for sure, she can add to that. But I think the management system approach on FSSC 22000 is a big difference with many of the other programs, but also that prerequisite programs in those technical specifications, they really give an in-depth requirements for the prerequisite programs for each of the sectors. And the other thing that we also think is that if you look at the cycle of 3-year certification, that's a big difference with other programs, that we have that first initial audit that is a much more in-depth audit, because the auditor comes in for the first time, needs to understand the organization, needs to review the hazard analysis, what is quite, and I was an auditor for 20 years, that's not easy. So we give the auditor more time for the initial audit, and then we have a 3-year cycle in which the annual audits are less time, but they need to do the same sampling of all the requirements. And I think that 3-cycle approach, my point of view, it's a different approach, and it gives the auditor more capability to do a thorough first audit, and then every 3 years there is again a longer audit that can give a more in-depth audit. So there are some differences, and again, it's a choice. One last comment. FSSC 22000, ISO 22000 is not a list of prescriptive requirements. It's not telling you exactly what to do and how to do things. It's asking you to do your analysis yourself. And I said it already, I think, in the beginning, and that gives more responsibility, because that you need to have a team that is dedicated to do a thorough analysis, but it also ensures that you are building a food safety management system that is fit for purpose, that's meeting your activities, your processes, and is fit for purpose for your organization. And also, it is a supply chain approach. You have to look at your suppliers, you have to look at your supply chain upstream, downstream. I think these are a couple, I can go on, but I should not do that. But these are a couple of typical differences from FSSC 22000. Elsie, perhaps you can add anything?
I think the only thing I would add, Cor, you gave a great explanation. But maybe the only other thing is that because of the harmonized structure, it is also easy to facilitate integrated management system auditing. So if your organization already has ISO 9001 or maybe 14001, it is easier to integrate because the harmonized structure is the same across the ISO management systems. So it helps a lot because you have the same type of approach.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you both for this detailed answer. Let me go to the next one. I see some people asking, are we sharing the slide deck? Yes, we are sharing the slide deck. We are also sharing the recording of this webinar. You will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with more information about this. And we will also include a link to the scheme documents. And by clicking on that link, you will also have access to our available guidance documents, because that was a question here as well. Let's see, maybe this is a bit more of a technical question. Let's see if we can answer it now. I'm not sure whether it's too specific, Elsevier, so if it's too specific for now, please let me know. But there is someone asking, based on your explanation of should and shall regarding PRPs, does this then mean one can implement FSSC 22000 using other PRPs, except for the technical standards?
Not sure I fully understand the question. What I was trying to say with the should and shall that I displayed on the screen was that in ISO 22000, if you look at the ISO 22000 standard, there is a should requirement to say that it's good to use the ISO technical specifications, but it is not a mandatory requirement. But when you do FSSC 22000, you have to apply the requirements of the relevant ISO technical specification. So that's one of the big differences between having ISO 22000 certification versus having the FSSC certification. It does not mean that if you have ISO 22000 that you can't implement the technical specifications. It's a good thing if you do that, but it is not an absolute requirement.
Well,
I hope I answered it correctly.
Well, no, maybe it's just good to touch upon that topic you addressed in your presentation again. Let's move on with the next question. And this is maybe also an interesting one. Cor, during your presentation, you were mentioning all the sectors in the food supply chain we cover. But which aspects of the food supply chain are not covered by FSSC?
Yeah, that's absolutely a great question. Yeah, and LCB can support me on that. But brokers and traders, I think that is one of the sectors that is not covered. There's also not the technical specification for that. So we cannot cover a sector when there is not a technical specification. So and of course we also look at market demand. If there is a demand, sometimes we even support to develop a technical specification. We did that, for instance, with packaging material. We supported the development of the technical specification for that. Another sector I think is machines and equipment. I think that is one of the sectors that is covered by ISO 22000, but not with FSSC. And I think a third one, and now LCB is going to check me, is I think food services like cleaning activities and pest control, that kind of things. Am I complete, LCB?
Well done.
Wow, I passed.
Well, thank you, Cor, for explaining that. I think we still have some time for questions left. There is a question from someone wondering whether FSSC has any document templates that could be used when implementing. Anyone who, Cor or LCB, would one of you like to answer?
This is a technical question. This is really a technical question.
Okay, I'll take it. So no, we do not provide specific templates. And the main reason for that is because it touches on something Cor said previously. Because our standard is based on ISO and the ISO methodologies and ISO mindsets, we don't want to be too prescriptive in terms of how you need to apply a certain clause or a requirement. It's up to the organization to decide how that clause applies to them, what makes sense for their organization, and to show how they meet them. So no, we do not have templates, but we leave it up to the different organizations to decide what works best for them.
Thank you.
I don't know, Cor, if you want to add something to that.
No, I think perfectly described, and I said it already. That's the whole approach of ISO 22000. That you need to do your risk and hazard analysis yourself and make a system that's fit for purpose. And every organization is unique. So yeah, that is absolutely true. Yeah.
Well, thank you both. I'm looking through the questions and we're also about to run out of time. I know LCB and Cor, you both have been keeping an eye out for those questions as well. Is there maybe one final question you would like to dedicate a bit of time to?
Maybe if I may, I just saw a question popping up on the screen about whether we will have an update to FSSC soon. Will there be a new version?
Will we?
Well, we will produce a new version at some point, but we did also make a commitment last year to not make changes unless it's really necessary, because we are also conscious that everybody's been through a really difficult time the last, 2 years now with COVID. So there's been a lot of change, a lot of disruption. So we committed to not make a change unless we need to. But saying that, we are also dependent on external drivers, so external inputs, for example, GFSI or ISO. So if there's a change on that level, then we might be forced to make an update as well. And someone mentioned that there's an update to ISO TS 22003, which is correct. It is being worked on, and it will actually be published somewhere during the first half of this year. But as with any other ISO document, there is a transition window, typically of 3 years. So we will have to update our scheme to align to the ISO document, but it's not going to happen this year.
Thank you, Elsbeth, for answering that final question. And again, thank you, Cor, and you, of course, Elsbeth, for your I think, very informative presentation. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this presentation, and it gave you some insights in the transition from ISO 22000 to FSSC 22000. We'll have to end this webinar, but don't worry, we have an upcoming webinar like this scheduled in May, on 10 May. And that webinar will be dedicated to explaining FSSC 22000 in a bit more detail, and how FSSC 22000 could benefit you. I would like to thank you all for signing up and for participating. And again, you will receive an email tomorrow with a recording of this webinar, the slide deck, a bit of additional information, and the invitation to sign up for our next webinar. Thank you all, and have a good day.
Thank you so much, and have a lovely day and stay safe.
Thank you for attending.